Staying safe while driving has been a special concern for African Americans. Although the automobile provided mobility and independence during the 20th century, African Americans were further exposed to systemic racism while driving around. An upcoming PBS documentary titled Driving While Black examines how the travel guide known as the Green Book helped keep Black motorists safe. Here's a preview.
Victor Green was the businessman who started the Negro Motorists Green Book, which was an African-American travel guide that started in 1936, and it was published until 1966, and it took African-Americans throughout the country safely. This is a time period when everything was segregated, north and south, and Green came up with this idea that what a fantastic thing it would be if there was a travel guide that could help African Americans to travel through the country.
Victor Green created the Negro Motorist Green Book, which was essentially a travel guide for African Americans taking road trips. It included listings for hotels, restaurants, boarding houses, public accommodations, amusement parks, campgrounds that would be accommodating of the Black tourist. And for Green, it was in many respects a stroke of genius, which is to recognize that African Americans have mobility, but when you go to a place where you don't have personal connections, where you're not familiar with the geography and the terrain, and you want to be ensured that you can find a place that's going to be welcoming, you pull out your copy of the Green Guide, you get the address, you look at your map, and off you go. It allows you to travel across country with a greater degree of security and comfort.
Geographically, the country was divided into black spaces and white spaces. Right. So black people didn't venture into white spaces. White people generally didn't venture into black spaces. But the automobile changes that, right? Highways intersect all of these spaces, and now people are out on the road moving between spaces, and it changes interactions, it changes etiquette, it changes the way we think about one another and the way we interact with one another, and it really starts to open up the country in ways that it had never been opened up before.
If you're an African American and you can afford a car, as mass car ownership is spreading, even if it's a used car, it provides a powerful alternative to the daily indignities of riding the rails, of riding a streetcar, of riding a bus. You have control over where you sit. You're not being supervised by bus conductors or train conductors. You don't have to defer to whites in ways that are really dehumanizing when you're traveling by car. And so there's a way in which being behind the wheel gives African Americans a degree of freedom, a degree of immunity from the slings and arrows of Jim Crow on a daily basis. To be sure, African Americans faced all sorts of dangers when they got behind the wheel of their own cars. On one hand, African Americans who have access to a car can leave where they are, they can travel to visit relatives, they can experience the various degrees of freedom in different parts of the region or the country more easily, but they also face all sorts of risks along the way. There are few places anywhere in the United States where African American travelers can stop safely and securely. Many black travelers carry portable toilets in the trunk of their cars because they can't be guaranteed that there'll be a restroom available to them at a service station alongside the road. Many long-distance black travelers would travel at night because the police regularly target African American drivers, leading some to decide to drive at night so they're not as easily seen. During the day, African Americans could be spotted much more easily by cops and were disproportionately targeted for what would later come to be known as driving while black.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.